M-A-O. Oh, go Ruby. No, ma'am. That is rude. Don't be rude, Ruby. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the ADHD Queens podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Erin Patterson, and today we're talking about your feelings. No, not your feelings, but we're talking about rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD. Have you heard of it? If not, I'm about to tell you all about it. I've had a lot of people recently asking questions and talking a lot about rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD. And this is something that can come up with lots of different types of mental health challenges like depression or anxiety, but it shows up a lot for people who have ADHD and people who are diagnosed with ADHD and autism in combination. One of the failures of the diagnostic criteria for ADHD in the DSM-5 TR is that it doesn't make any mention of emotional dysregulation at all. Now, rejection sensitive dysphoria is a form of emotional dysregulation, but it is not like emotional dysregulation can be getting too excited about something or too wild or too hyper, as well as like getting too down or too low or too, rejected feeling. And so the emotional dysregulation that comes in ADHD is not talked about by in the diagnostic criteria at all. And so it is a relatively new thing that we are uh, talking about. Ruby, that's so distracting. Ruby, Ruby, lay down. No, ma'am. Come here. Get down. No, that's bad. I came in like a wrecking ball. Oh, no, we're not doing that. No, ma'am. Sorry. Started singing wrecking ball and she got all rambunctious. Yeah. We can be way up here emotionally dysregulated or way down here emotionally dysregulated. And so rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD, is a form of emotional dysregulation that shows up for some people with ADHD. Not all people with ADHD have it, but it does show up for some of us. And it can show up in other mental health struggles too. Anxiety, depression, those kinds of things can also have an aspect of rejection sensitive dysphoria. So, what is rejection sensitive dysphoria? It is when you have an experience of being criticized or there is a reaction from someone that's not what your expectation is. Okay, let's say I've got something that I'm excited about. I got a new dress or I got a new shirt or something like that. And I'm excited to show it off to, whatever important person is in my life. And I say, "Oh, look at this thing that I got because I'm so excited about it." I might be emotionally dysregulated, too excited about this, shirt that I just got. And I show it to them and they don't respond in the way that I expect them to respond. I want them to also be excited about the shirt, but they're not. And they're just like, "Oh, that's cool." So that may trigger rejection sensitive dysphoria in me because that response, even though it's not negative, it's not like they said, "Oh my God, that's an ugly shirt. You should never have bought that." That could happen, but even a neutral response can sometimes trigger rejection sensitive dysphoria because it's not the expected response. And so even just like, "Oh, that's cool," but it's not as excited as I would want them to be about it, can like create these big feelings really fast, And so it's important to understand that it's not always a negative reaction to something. Sometimes it can be a neutral reaction that causes it. And, so then you have all of these big feelings really fast, and it can be like, you know, anxious, it could be panic, it could be anger. All of those are kind of like how your nervous system responds to this trigger. And it's such an interesting thing that happens because it's very biological, and a lot of people who don't experience rejection sensitive dysphoria or RSD, I'm just going to start saying RSD because that's a lot of words. Uh, a lot of people who don't experience RSD have a really difficult time understanding why their loved ones who do experience it are responding in the ways that they do. And I heard somebody compare it to having a sunburn. So most of us have had the opportunity to be sunburned at some point. And so think of having a sunburn and somebody coming along and laying a hand on this sunburned area. It may be a touch that under normal circumstances would not bother you. It would be a neutral touch. It would be a pleasant or kind touch, even. But because the skin is sunburned, it's more sensitive to the touch. And so all of a sudden, that touch, which on non sunburned skin wouldn't be hurting you, is now creating pain because that skin is extra sensitive. And so what happens is that the ADHD brain has, neurologically, it is wired different. And so originally they started looking at whether or not this rejection sensitive dysphoria, this RSD, was showing up because kids with ADHD were getting so many more negative messages growing up, standing up in class or not being in line or doing things that they're not supposed to. They're being corrected. They're being told, sit down, get in line, stop doing that. Da, 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 da. So you have all these negative messages that kids with ADHD get. And then, you get social messages too. So, like, other kids in the classroom or in the school or whatever might say, oh, well, you would be one of the cool kids if you weren't so weird. Or they might, say things like, why can't you just calm down? Or you talk too much or whatever. So originally, researchers were thinking that this RSD was an experience that people with ADHD had, which then caused them to be hypersensitive later down the road. So, it's kind of like, would that be considered trauma? You're getting these feedback, these negative messages, like little T trauma. It's bothersome. It ruins the day. It, makes you feel isolated from your peers or embarrassed because you get in trouble in front of them. And so could this experience over and over and over be creating this RSD, this sensitivity to any kind of like negative messages like that? And then, the masking happens somewhere along the way because we want to cover up the things that we're getting negative messages about. So then we, try to present this beautiful, wonderful, put together version of ourselves in front of everybody. And, when we get that criticism, it's like they saw through the mask all of a sudden. Oh no, they see who I really am and I'm no good. So the anxiety could show up because it creates this feeling of I'm worried about how this will, impact my relationship with this person, or they don't like me anymore, or they think I'm not good at my job or whatever. Or the anger a lot of times can be turned inward to ourselves, and it could be, I'm mad at myself, I'm a fraud, I'm no good at this, I'm an imposter, I'm terrible at my job, or I'm terrible at this thing or that thing or whatever. Everybody hates me. Guess I'll go eat worms.
Nobody likes me, everybody hates me. Guess I'll go eat worms.
Sort of reaction. Or, right. Or it could be an outward expression of it, right? You flip out and you're like, well, I don't want you to see my shirt anyway. I'm just going to take this and I'm leaving or whatever. And so you kind of go into a meltdown mode. So, so there are a lot of reactions that happen with it, but what the research is showing is that these reactions are actually more biologically based. So it's not necessarily that we've had all these negative messages in childhood and that's created the rejection sensitive dysphoria. It's actually that our brains are wired that way. And so our nervous system is what's reacting. Just like the sunburn, the pain is a nervous system that happens, a nervous system response that happens, so is emotional pain. So I'm going to read this little section from a book that was written on rejection sensitive dysphoria by Kristen Brent Bentecourt. Kristen Brent Bentecourt. Now, this one in particular is the ADHD Guide to Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, which is a combination of autism and ADHD, which RSD shows up a lot in somebody with both diagnoses. But this is from chapter 1, and she kind of explains how the emotional pain that we feel in RSD actually has a neurological foundation. So I'm just going to read this. The brain processes rejection through specific neural pathways. Research demonstrates that emotional pain activates the same neural regions as physical pain, the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. For individuals with ADHD, these pathways function differently. The prefrontal cortex, which regulates emotional responses, shows a distinct structural. That made me get crazy. For ADHDs with for for individuals with ADHD, these pathways function differently. The prefrontal cortex, which regulates emotional responses, shows distinct structural variations. These differences mean your brain processes social feedback through an amplified system. So think of the amplified system. I'm talking about, all right, my positive emotions can get really excited, and my negative emotions can also become really intense down here. So everything is amplified in the ADHD brain. When you think about hyperactivity, our movements are amplified. When you think about emotions, our emotions are amplified. When you think about our attention is amplified in a dysregulated way, like hyper focus over here, or I didn't hear what the heck you said at all over here. So everything is operating without brakes. It's like the emotional system does not have good enough brakes to slow it down when those triggers come. The hyperactive system, the movement system, does not have good enough brakes to keep you still or keep you seated when you need to sometimes. And so everything then is amplified, including the responses that we have to social rejection. All right, the next paragraph says, consider the neurochemistry involved. Dopamine deficiency, which is central to ADHD, affects reward processing and emotional regulation. Your brain seeks dopamine through social approval, yet paradoxically experiences intensified pain when that approval seems withdrawn. And this creates a neurological vulnerability that compounds with each perceived rejection. So you're looking for dopamine in social interactions. When I buy the shirt and I show the shirt, I'm looking for the dopamine. The shirt is giving me dopamine. Now I want dopamine from somebody who is also as excited about this shirt as I am. So when they're not, then it's a crash. And because my emotional regulation system does not have good brakes, I crash really hard down into, nobody cares about me, or he hates me, or I shouldn't have bought that shirt, or shame on me, and all of those things. And so, because there is a biological foundation to this, it's important to understand that, they used to would say that therapy was helpful in working through rejection sensitive dysphoria. I think it can be, because if you've got some issues that are like, I call them hot button triggers, right? These things happened when you were young, they're here. And if somebody says something similar to that or does something similar to that, it's going to, bring these old feelings out. So it can be helpful to process through some of those things. But because it's a biological issue, and I've said this before about ADHD in general, because it's a biological issue, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can talk my way into healing from this RSD. I'm not going to heal my ADHD. I can manage my ADHD, but I'm not going to heal it. It's not ever going to be cured or disappeared. And so RSD is similar. We've talked about diabetes in the past. You can manage diabetes with insulin and things like that, but, a person who is born with a pancreas that doesn't produce enough, insulin is not just gonna miraculously start doing that. I mean, at least I don't think that's where we are in society, medical advances. Right? So, no magic wands here that are just going to make the RSD disappear, including therapy. Now, you can learn what is RSD, how does it impact me, how can I manage it when I start to feel, that it's coming up. Do I take a break instead of just letting it, come out into a meltdown? But biologically, if it's something that you struggle with on a level that it's really interfering things, there are also medications that can be useful in helping the emotional regulation piece, specifically when it comes to RSD. Oh, thank you. Your mouth stinks. That's such a good girl. All right, Ruby, let's tell everybody about the medicines that can help with emotional dysregulation. Oh, okay. Well, I did. I'm having RSD. My dog just hurt my feelings. It's okay. It's okay. I'm just going to tell myself it's not personal. It's not personal. He's an animal. It has nothing to do with me. What medications can be helpful for RSD? There are two in particular that come to mind and are often given to children who have struggles, or often given to children who struggle with like impulse control as an add on to their ADHD medication. And that is clonidine, not Clonopin. Clonidine is Capve is the brand name of that, and the other one is guanfacine or Intuniv. So both of those are in the category of medications called alpha 2 antagonists, and are a lot of. I think originally they were used for people with blood pressure issues. So they have a little bit of a sedating effect, but because of the way that they work in the brain, it is useful in helping the emotional regulation aspect of things. So both of these medications act on the alpha 2 receptors in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which helps mildly with attention, but also mostly with impulse. And so, if we're treating impulse control, even adults and children alike, then what naturally comes along with that is increased emotional regulation. And when we have increased emotional regulation, we have decreased rejection sensitive responses. Another type of medication or types of medication that are helpful for RSD are what are called MAOIs. And these are they used to be used a lot, and they well, maybe still are, to treat atypical depression. So, you know, atypical depression shows up in ways that are not typical of your regular depression, and so these medications were helpful. It's kind of curious. I wonder how much of that atypical depression that they used to see, what we used to call, is now what is referred to a lot of times as treatment resistant depression, which could potentially be linked to untreated ADHD and the emotional dysregulation that comes along with that. So that would be an interesting thing to look into. All right, let's see if I can say these words. Ready? Monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Okay, so what does MAOI stand for? Monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Ooh, I did good. Monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Monoamine oxidase inhibitors. Say that 3 times fast. So the MAOIs were kind of kicked up in the 1950s, getting started to treat people with atypical depression symptoms. And they weren't used as much because, doctors much preferred SSRIs, but they were helpful for some people. And so the MAOIs can also be helpful with some of the emotional regulation aspect of ADHD. while treating the ADHD with stimulants or non-stimulants does con does help a bit, I find, it helps pretty significantly with emotional regulation overall. Sometimes you'll find, especially with the stimulants, that once they're out of your system, you're not getting the benefit at the end of the day, and so evenings may be more difficult. But also, there may be just lingering pieces of this emotional dysregulation that are not fully treated by stimulant or non-stimulant therapy. So you may need an add-on for mood, and if it's a lot of the rejection sensitive dysphoria that you're noticing is coming up, then it could be important to, talk to your doctor about potentially do we add something, in the evening to kind of help with this emotional regulation and RSD piece of things. Um, okay, so let's talk about some behavioral patterns that often show up in people with RSD. Because we are trying so hard to avoid any kind of criticism or rejection or negative interaction, a lot of times there is extreme masking that is happening, perfectionism, or people pleasing, also. Trying to put on the best show, make sure everything's perfect, never make a mistake, double check things, and it can create a lot of tension in yourself, and then just stress about trying to get all of this stuff perfect because it feels so bad. It's such an intense emotional pain that feels physical when somebody is triggered, when the RSD is triggered, that we wanna avoid any kind of criticism at all costs. So everything has to be perfect. I have to do it exactly the way that you want me to. I have to, bend over backwards to make sure that everybody's happy so that I don't get any criticism. The house has to be perfect when people come to visit, or the food has to be perfect, or the decisions have to be perfect, or whatever it is, and it's very stressful and puts a lot of pressure on people who are trying to not experience these pieces of criticism or rejection. And a lot of times because people are so, I guess, hyper focused or hyper fixated on doing everything right and making sure that the everything is perfect and that they're not getting any criticism. It can really make intimacy draining for people with RSD. And so a lot of times they might isolate, or they might, decide that they don't have the energy to kind of do this. And so then, they might go into shutdown mode, or they might avoid social situations, or even intimacy in their romantic relationships because they just feel like they can't tolerate any kind of negative feedback. And so I think it's important for us to be able to recognize what are the ways that RSD shows up. How does it impact our lives? Is this something that we need to be talking about with our therapist? Is this something that we need to be talking about with our doctors, medication wise? But understanding, number one, that RSD is real and that people do experience this. It's not something that they can help. It is a biological, neurological thing that is happening, and it's the way that your brain is wired. And so it's also not useful for you to sit around and beat yourself up because you have these reactions to those things. That's why you need to know what it is, because when your brain is built to respond that way to neutral or negative triggers, then if we're able to just kind of like lean into it and be a little bit vulnerable rather than putting this mask on and trying to be perfect all the time, if we're able to say, like, oh, I'm going to forget to do things, or, I'm going to buy a shirt that not everybody likes, and to be able to, get your mind to the place where you can say, I don't, I'm I know what this is when it happens, and so I don't have to, fully go into the crash, right? To be able to say, "Oh, wow, I'm having a little RSD come up right now," rather than just like letting it, I don't know, grow into this big giant monster, can be useful. I think the other thing that's important for us to remember is that RSD can be very debilitating. It can make it very difficult for people to navigate careers, navigate relationships, navigate life in general. And so, it's something that we've got to take seriously. And if you are living with somebody who has RSD or you have RSD yourself, to be able to say, wow, this really does make functioning hard. And as a person maybe who doesn't have RSD, recognizing that this is a struggle and it's biological and they can't help it, but there are options for improving it. Like I said, there's medication available. You can do some therapy work around it. But the biggest thing is, I think leaning into telling people how it impacts you, telling people when you're having RSD moments so that they know, wow, okay, even this neutral response can trigger that. Maybe I can do something a little bit different, but also you don't have to mask it. Carl Jung, which is one of the founding fathers of psychology, said that which we resist persists. So the things we refuse to work on and the things that we refuse to confront or acknowledge, as long as we're doing this and saying, no, 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 it's going to keep happening. It's going to keep coming up. It's going to keep impacting things. And so, as long as we're putting that mask on and trying to be perfect, we're not perfect. We're hot messes. All of us are hot messes, even people without ADHD. You're putting that mask on, trying to be perfect. It's exhausting, and it's just going to keep you isolated from people, and it is going to put so much pressure on you that eventually it's going to fall. You're going to break, and not good things come along with that. When we can just say, I'm not perfect. I'm gonna forget things. I'm gonna struggle to get tasks started. The house is not gonna be clean. The laundry's not gonna be put away. Occasionally, I'm gonna have a hard time, just even hearing negative feedback. So when you can lean into that stuff and you can start to tell people like, okay, I'm having an RSD moment here, then you can work through it. You can have conversations, and that's how you begin to do something different to get a different response. And if it feels like some of those behavioral changes or some of that, talking to yourself differently doesn't make as big of an impact as you would like, all right, talk about some medicine. It's still a dopamine issue, a dopamine regulation issue. And it's something that, if you can't make it homemade, store bought is fine. I say that all the time. So anyway, if you got questions about RSD, put them in the comments. We'd love to hear your experiences or how it shows up for you. Oh, I got distracted. Anyway, I don't know what I'm hoping. Yeah, I think that's it. All right, that's it for today. We're trying something new, just talking about one thing at a time. That way people can click on videos that are applicable to them and you don't have to sort through a bunch of craziness. Yeah. So there's a bell somewhere that you click and it does things. I think that's a notification bell, like to subscribe and something like that. We've done 8 episodes and this is number 9, and I still don't know what the heck all those buttons do, but that's okay. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram. Are we going in order? TikTok, sometimes I'm really not on there. I should hire somebody to do that. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I said Instagram. And our website, ADHDqueens.co. So that's it for today. And thanks for joining us. Remember, we might have ADHD, but we're queens with ADHD. Non queens, welcome too. See you next time.